My mother snatched the microphone for 47 seconds before I stopped counting. I know because I was looking at the clock on the wall behind her. The ornate one the venue manager had pointed out during our walkthrough 3 weeks earlier. The one with gold hands that moved in absolute silence. I had been watching those hands for 47 seconds and thinking about how many times in my life I had stood very still and counted something instead of doing anything about it. 180 people were looking at me. My father was standing at his seat in the third row, arms crossed, nodding the slow, deliberate way he nodded when he had already decided something was finished and wanted everyone else to arrive at the same conclusion on their own. His suit was dark gray. He had worn that suit to every important occasion for the last decade. He wore it like armor. Owen was somewhere behind me. In the small anteroom off the east hallway, where he had gone 8 minutes earlier to check on his mother. She had been having trouble with her blood pressure all week. He did not know what was happening in this room. Father Thomas looked at me over his reading glasses. He was 72 years old. He had performed weddings for 40 years. He had seen a great many things stand between a ceremony and its conclusion. He was not asking me what to do. He was waiting to see what I would say. I turned to him. Please continue. 2 words, the only kind I trusted myself with in that moment. Father Thomas adjusted the small microphone clipped to his collar. He turned a page in the ceremony book. He cleared his throat, once, with the practiced neutrality of someone who has learned that the best response to extraordinary circumstances is ordinary behavior. And then he continued as if my mother was not standing 12 feet away holding a microphone. She had walked up and taken from the coordinator without being invited to do so. That was the moment. But let me go back to the morning. Because you need to understand what kind of woman stands in front of 180 people and says that while her own mother is still speaking, you need to understand how a person becomes someone who does not flinch. It is not something that happens quickly, and it does not feel like strength when it is happening. It feels, mostly, like rearranging flowers. The bridal suite at Hargrove Hall smelled like white ranunculus, and that particular variety of silence that only exists in rooms that cost too much per hour. I had reorganized the flowers 3 times by 9 in the morning, not because anything was wrong with them. Our florist, a woman named Della who had been arranging flowers at weddings for 22 years, had done exactly what we asked. White ranunculus, soft sage greenery, nothing that would compete with the dress. The arrangement was exactly right. I reorganized it anyway. My hands needed somewhere to go. Gwen came in at 7:42 with 2 cups of coffee and set one down beside the mirror without being asked. She knew I would need it there. She has known me for 16 years, which is long enough to know where I need my coffee when I am trying not to let anyone see that I am frightened. Your mom just called the venue coordinator, she said. I moved a ranunculus 2 inches to the left. For the 4th time this morning, Gwen added. The coffee was in a white paper cup with a lid that was slightly crooked. I straightened it. She's coming, I said. I know. Both of them. Gwen sat down on the small settee near the window. She held her cup in both hands the way she did when she was deciding how much truth to give me at one time. Rebecca. I know, Gwen. They told you they weren't. I know what they told me. I stepped back from the flowers and looked at the whole arrangement. It was identical to how Della had left it. 3 reorganizations and nothing had changed. I just need them to see it happen. And then it's over. Outside the window, the parking lot was beginning to fill. A white delivery van. A catering cart rolling along a brick path. Everything moving in the right direction. At the right time, for the right reasons. The morning looked exactly like a morning that was going to go well. Gwen was quiet for a long moment. I could hear her working through something, the way she always did before she said what she actually meant. Okay, she said finally. Okay. Or just okay. She looked at me. One okay. Just the one. Good. I picked up my coffee. 1 is enough. What I did not tell Gwen was why I was so certain they were coming. Not that I had guessed, not that a relative had called with information. Not that I had read anything into the venue coordinator's voice. I was certain because I had arranged it myself. 3 months before that morning, I had sent the invitation personally. A white envelope, a card with both our names on it, a note inside in my own handwriting. Rebecca and Owen would like you to be there. My father had not responded. My mother had called twice, each time with a different version of the same argument, and each time I had waited until she was finished, and then said something careful and non-committal that gave her nothing to push against. Neither of them had said they would not come. I had counted on that. My father had never, in his 63 years, allowed something important to happen without him in the room. Staying away would mean it had gone forward, without his approval, without his presence, without anything of his in it. And Gerald Mercer did not know how to accept that. What none of them knew, what I had been carrying for 3 months through invitation printings and dress fittings and catering tastings and rehearsal dinners, was the other thing. The thing that was the real reason I had written that note and put it in that envelope and driven to the post office on a Tuesday afternoon to make sure it went out with the day's mail. My father did not know who Owen was. Not really. Not his full name. Not what the name meant. But I did. Gwen stood at the door. I'll go tell the coordinator we're on schedule. Thank you. She paused. One okay. Still holding. After she left, I stood alone with the flowers and the expensive quiet and the coffee growing cold beside the mirror. I looked at my reflection and did not recognize the expression on my face as courage. It was something quieter than that. It was the face of a woman who had made her decision 3 months ago and was only now arriving at the part where she had to live inside it. 15 minutes later, my mother took the microphone. I have been a speech therapist for 11 years. People hear that and picture children learning to read aloud, or stroke patients relearning words one syllable at a time. All of that is part of it. But the piece that does not appear in the description, the piece I think about most often when I am sitting across from a patient who has gone very still, is this. Most of the time, the voice is not gone. It is waiting. It is waiting for someone to stop telling the person it belongs to that they have no right to use it. I sat in the bridal suite with that thought and my lukewarm coffee and understood, in the way you understand something you have known for a long time without naming, that I had spent 11 years as a professional in a language I could not speak at home. My name is Rebecca Mercer. As of today, Rebecca Webb, which is a name I will have to practice until it stops sounding like a stranger's. I am 38 years old. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a house that was always slightly too formal for the people living in it, in a family that expressed love primarily through the management of expectations. I moved to Raleigh at 26, far enough from Charlotte to breathe, and close enough that leaving never felt like a declaration. I worked at a children's hospital for 4 years, then moved to a private practice that split its time between pediatric patients and adults, referred by neurologists. I drove a 10-year-old Volvo that I kept very clean. I had an apartment in a neighborhood with old oak trees on the street. I called home every Sunday at 4 in the afternoon, which was the agreed-upon time, and I said the agreed-upon things. And after I hung up, I sat quietly on my couch for a while until I felt like myself again. That was my life for 12 years. It was a life that functioned, if you did not press it too hard on the question of what it was functioning toward. The coffee beside the mirror had gone the wrong temperature by the time I looked at it again. Not cold, not warm. The particular lukewarm that is worse than either. I set it down. In the mirror, my hands. They were steady. They were always steady in the room, which was something my patients needed, and something I had spent years learning to produce on demand. My grandmother's hands had not been steady at the end. They trembled in the particular way that very old hands do, when the body has been working too long and has begun to lose interest in certain functions. I was 12 years old when she died. The hospital room was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like cleaning solution, and something sweet underneath it, the kind of sweet that comes from cut flowers going slightly wrong. White carnations in a plastic pitcher on the windowsill, Someone had brought them in from outside, and they were already beginning to turn at the edges. My father was on his phone reading account numbers to someone. My mother was at the nurse's station confirming paperwork. I was standing in the corner of the room because I did not know where else to stand, and my grandmother was in the bed with her hands open on the blanket, trembling slightly, and nobody was holding them. I wanted to go to her. I was 12 years old. I did not know if I was allowed. Nobody had said I was not allowed. Nobody had said anything to me at all. By the time my mother came back into the room, my grandmother had stopped breathing. My father put his phone in his pocket. My mother made a sound that was not quite crying, and I stood in the corner and understood, without anyone telling me, that the people I loved most would always be occupied with the logistics of what came next. That they were not bad people. That this was simply how they moved through the world. The belief I built from that understanding took years to complete. It went something like this. If I never created conflict, if I never wanted something in a way that cost them anything, they would stay. And if they stayed, I would not have to stand in the corner of a room, watching someone I loved die without anyone holding their hand. I carried that belief for 26 years. It was expensive, and I did not know the full price until much later. I met Owen on a Thursday in October, 3 years ago, at a conference on acoustic design in clinical spaces held at a hotel in downtown Charlotte. He was presenting on sound absorption in pediatric wards. I was in the audience because a colleague had forwarded the registration, and I had nothing better to do that Thursday afternoon, which in retrospect is the only reason any of this happened. He spoke for 35 minutes with the particular focus of someone who found the subject genuinely interesting and had learned, through practice, how to make other people find it interesting too. During the question period, I asked about frequency ranges and their effect on patient anxiety in speech therapy settings. He answered carefully, for about 4 minutes, and then said that was a good question and asked whether I would be willing to talk through it further at dinner. We talked until 11 that night. We talked about sound and silence and the difference between the two. We talked about what it meant to help someone find a way to express something their body had decided to resist. At one point, he said something about the difference between a room that absorbs sound and a room that simply muffles it, and I understood that he was talking about something more than acoustics. I did not say that out loud. I was still, at that point, someone who chose not to say things out loud. 3 months later, I called home on a Sunday at 4 in the afternoon and mentioned his name. My father said, "A civil engineer, Rebecca." That is not. He did not finish the sentence. He had been ending sentences that way my entire life, leaving the last part unspoken, because the last part was where the disappointment lived, and he had learned that implication was more efficient than accusation. The following Sunday, when he called back to finish the sentence, I listened to 40 seconds of it. Then I said, quietly, that I had to go, and I hung up. It was the first time in 35 years that I had ended a conversation with my father before he was ready for it to end. My hands were unsteady for about a minute afterward. Then they stopped. I sat with that for a long time. It did not feel like bravery. It felt like something I should have done much earlier, and had not, because I had been standing in the corner of a room for 26 years waiting to find out if I was allowed. What I did not know yet that October in Charlotte, listening to Owen talk about sound and rooms and the spaces between words, was that he was carrying something too, something that would take him 9 more months to say out loud. He had a very good reason for waiting. It was, as it turned out, the same reason I had sent that wedding invitation 3 months ago with a handwritten note inside. 2 people in possession of the same information, each waiting for the right moment, each choosing the same day to stop waiting. Owen told me on a Sunday evening in January, 9 months after we got engaged, in my kitchen in Raleigh over a dinner neither of us ended up eating. He had driven up from Charlotte that afternoon. He brought wine, which was not unusual, and he set it on the counter and did not open it, which was. We talked about ordinary things for a while. Work. The weather. A film we had both half-watched on separate nights and wanted to see the rest of. Somewhere around 7 o'clock, in the middle of a sentence about nothing in particular, Owen stopped. He put his hand flat on the kitchen table. It was a specific gesture, deliberate, the way he moved when he had decided something was going to happen, and was simply choosing the moment. "I need to tell you something about your father," he said. I put my fork down. "He told me about Martin Calloway. He told it the way someone tells a story they have rehearsed for a long time and are still not sure is the right story to tell. Carefully, in the right order." Owen and his father had been in the construction and civil engineering business together, or had been trying to be, in the years before Owen finished his degree. Martin Calloway had built a small company over 15 years. A real estate and development consulting firm, mid-size, solid. He had taken on a business partner 6 years in because the work was expanding faster than one person could manage. The partner was Gerald Mercer. They worked together for 6 years. And then, in 2009, Gerald filed documents with the county that Martin had never signed. Board minutes that reflected decisions that had never been made. A restructuring that transferred majority ownership to Gerald's sole control. By the time Martin's attorney identified what had happened, Gerald had already executed the restructuring, and the legal process of contesting it would take years and money Martin did not have. Martin lost the company. He lost the building the company operated out of. He spent the following 2 years trying to hold on to the house, and could not. Owen was 19 when the bank came for it. He had taken 3 jobs by then. He did not tell Martin how tired he was because Martin already knew, and there was nothing to do with that knowledge except carry it. "He rebuilt," Owen said. "It took a long time. He's in Asheville now. He consults for smaller firms, residential development. It's not what it was. But he's okay." I was looking at my hands on the table. "I knew your last name by our 3rd month," Owen said. "Mercer isn't a common name in that world. I knew who your father was, and you waited. I waited." He was quiet for a moment. "I waited because I didn't know what to do with it. And then I kept waiting because I thought it would get easier to say. And it didn't. And then we were engaged. And I thought I had to say it before the wedding, but I kept thinking there would be a better time. There wasn't. No." He turned his fork over once on the table. There wasn't. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car went past on the street, and the sound of it faded slowly, and then it was quiet again. "Why do you use Webb?" I asked. He looked up. "After the house, I changed my professional name to my mother's maiden name. Not to hide anything, just because I needed to start from something that wasn't already carrying a definition." He paused. "Webb is my middle name. It's on my birth certificate. It's not a false identity. It's just the part I chose to lead with." I understood that more than he knew. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I think I should call your father," Owen said. "Before the wedding. Tell him who I am. Give him the chance to react before there are 180 people watching him do it." "No." He was quiet. "No," I said again. "We are not calling him. We are not meeting with him. We are not giving him the chance to prepare for this in advance so that he can walk into our wedding having already worked out what he's going to say and how he's going to manage it. Rebecca, he managed everything. His entire life. He managed situations and people and outcomes, and he is very good at it. The one thing he cannot manage is something he doesn't have time to prepare for." I was keeping my voice even. My hands were flat on the table. "I have been giving him time to prepare my whole life. I am done with that." Owen said, "If he sees me and recognizes me at the ceremony, then he sees you and recognizes you at the ceremony." "In front of everyone?" "Yes." Owen was quiet for a long time. He was looking at me the way he looked at things he was trying to understand fully before responding to. It was one of the things I had noticed about him from the beginning, that he did not answer before he was ready, which was unusual and which I had not known I needed until I met someone who did it. "You want to invite them," he said finally. "Not a question. I want to invite them. I want my mother to come. I want my father to come, and I want him to see your face for the first time on the day I choose, in a room I choose, with the people I choose around me. Owen picked up his wine glass. He had not opened the bottle. He set it back down. Please continue, I said. He looked at me. That's what I'm going to say, I told him. If something happens during the ceremony, if they come and it goes the way I think it might go, that's what I'm going to say to the officiant. I've been practicing it. Owen was quiet for a moment longer. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. He opened his contacts and turned the screen toward me. Martin Calloway, a number with an Asheville area code. I haven't called him since Thanksgiving, he said. Okay, he doesn't know any of this is happening. I know. I looked at the number for a moment, then looked at Owen. We can tell him after. Owen put the phone back in his pocket. He picked up his fork. We ate dinner, finally, in a quiet that was different from the quiet before. The kind that has something resolved in it, even if nothing is fixed. 3 months later, standing in the bridal suite with the flowers I had reorganized 3 times, I understood that I had not fully prepared for the weight of actually doing it. Planning to be brave is not the same thing as standing in a room and being brave. It is quieter and harder, and it requires the kind of stillness I was still not sure I had. What I had, instead, was practice. 2 words. Short sentences. Please continue. Gwen came back at 10:43. I know the time because I was looking at the clock again, which is something I do when I am trying to make peace with the fact that time is passing whether I am ready for it to or not. Gerald's car is in the parking lot, she said from the doorway. She did not come all the way in. She stood at the threshold the way you stand when you are delivering information you are not sure the other person wants to receive. Both of them. I saw them walk in through the main entrance about 10 minutes ago. They went to the East Wing. The East Wing was where the ceremony space was. Okay, I said. The coordinator seated them. She said they were quiet. Didn't make any trouble coming in. They won't make trouble coming in, I said. That's not how my father operates. Gwen came into the room then and sat down on the settee and looked at me in the mirror with the expression she used when she wanted to say something and was weighing the cost of saying it. Rebecca, I know. I just want to make sure you... I know, Gwen. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Owen texted. His mother's blood pressure cuff isn't reading right. His cousin is with her, but she needs someone who knows the medication. He'll handle it, I said. He's going to step out during the early part of the ceremony. I know. I had known this was possible since Thursday. Owen's mother managed her blood pressure carefully and had for years. And there were days when the cuff gave inaccurate readings, and someone needed to take a manual reading and confirm the medication timing. It was not a crisis. It was management. Owen was good at management. He would be back before anything significant happened. I had told myself this several times since Thursday, and I believed it, mostly. You look beautiful, Gwen said. I looked at myself in the mirror. The dress was heavier than I remembered from the fitting. Not uncomfortable, just present in a way I had not expected. The weight of it distributed differently when I was standing still than when I was moving around the boutique in October, deciding if it was the right one. It was the right one. I had known that when I tried it on, and I had not changed my mind since. And the weight was just something to hold. I had been standing in front of mirrors my entire life, and I had never once seen the expression that was on my face in that moment. It was not what I expected courage to look like. It was not what I expected fear to look like either. It was something in between those two things. Something that did not have a name I could reach. The way certain emotions arrive too complicated for the words available. I started to count. It is what I do when I am processing something too large for one thought. I count. I always have. The clock hands, the seconds, the years, 38 years old, 38, which meant 26 years since my grandmother's hospital room, 26 years of believing that the right behavior would eventually earn the right response, 26 years of Sunday, calls at 4 in the afternoon, and sentences that began with, "I just thought," and conversations that ended when my father decided they were over. 26 years of standing in the corner of various rooms, waiting to find out if I was allowed. I started counting the Sundays. I got to approximately 400 before I understood that the number was not going to tell me anything I needed to know. I stopped, not because I reached a conclusion, not because the counting had finished, or because I had found what I was looking for at the end of it. I stopped because counting had stopped making sense, the way certain habits stop making sense when you look directly at them. I had been counting all morning. In the ceremony room, 47 seconds of clock hands. In the kitchen in January, the seconds of silence after Owen told me everything. In the parking lot of the hospital in Charlotte 3 years ago, counting traffic lights on the way home from the conference, wondering whether to text him first or wait. The decision had been made 3 months ago. In my kitchen. Owen's hand flat on the table, the Calloway story in the air between us, and my answer, "No. We invite them, and you let my father see your face." The counting was just what I had been doing while I waited to arrive here. I looked at myself in the mirror and understood that I had not prepared for all of it. I had prepared for the ceremony. I had prepared for the possibility of confrontation, for the voices, for the moment when I would need to say 2 words and mean them. I had practiced those 2 words until they came without effort. What I had not prepared for was standing in a dress that weighed more than I expected, in a room that smelled like expensive flowers I had rearranged 3 times, knowing that my father was in the East Wing, and that Owen was going to step out during the ceremony for 10 minutes to take care of his mother, and that I was going to be standing at the front of a room with 180 people, and my parents seated somewhere in the middle of them. I had not prepared for the feeling of it. The planning was one thing. The living inside it was another. Gwen was watching me in the mirror. "I'm fine," I said. "I know you are," she said. "I'm just sitting here." I looked at the flowers on the dressing table. The ranunculus had not moved since the last time I arranged them. They were exactly where Della had put them 3 hours ago. 3 reorganizations and nothing had changed. Some things do not move regardless of how many times you try to place them differently. And some things change completely the first time. "Go tell Joanna we're on schedule," I said. Gwen stood. At the door she paused, and I knew she was deciding whether to say something more, and I was glad when she didn't. There are moments when the kindest thing another person can do is simply believe you and leave. She left. I stood alone in the bridal suite and held the dress up slightly at the sides, the way you learn to walk in a dress that has weight. You do not fight the weight. You hold it and you move. 11 minutes later, the processional music began. Hargrove Hall had been a tobacco warehouse in another century. Someone had restored it carefully, keeping the original wood beams and the high windows that ran along the east wall, adding enough warmth to make it feel like a place people would choose for something important. In the spring, the honeysuckle came in through the open doors at the back. And on the day of our wedding, the weather was the kind of mild that made the air feel like it had been arranged deliberately. 180 chairs. White ranunculus on every other row end, the same flower Della had put in the bridal suite. I had not planned that. It was a coincidence that felt, standing at the entrance of the corridor, like a small assurance from no one in particular. Owen had texted at 10:58. His mother's blood pressure cuff was giving false readings. His cousin Marcus was with her but did not know her medication schedule the way Owen did. He needed 10 minutes. He would be back before the processional. He was sorry. I had written back. "Take the time. It's fine." It was fine. I had known this might happen and had decided, when I made peace with it on Thursday, that it was something I could hold. Owen's mother had managed a chronic condition for 11 years without complaint and without drama, and with the particular efficiency of someone who understood that health required maintenance and maintenance required attention. Owen stepping out for 10 minutes to help her was exactly the kind of thing he would do. It was one of the reasons I was marrying him. I stood in the corridor outside the ceremony space and looked through the arched window in the door. 180 guests seated. The late morning light came through the east windows in long, pale rectangles that crossed the floor at a low angle. Father Thomas was at the lectern, speaking quietly to the music director. The string quartet was tuning, each instrument briefly, not quite together, the small organized chaos that precedes the organized sound. Owen was not at the altar. I looked at the third row. My father was there. Dark gray suit, arms on the armrests of the chair in the particular way he held himself when he wanted to appear at ease and was not. My mother sat beside him in something gray and composed. She was looking toward the front of the room, toward the lectern, toward the microphone stand that Joanna's team had positioned at the left side of the ceremony space for the readers. Watching my mother look at a microphone was like watching someone recognize an old friend across a room. Gwen beside me said nothing. "One okay?" I said. "Still just the one," she said. I had heard them come in, distantly, while I was in the bridal suite with the door closed. Not their voices, just the particular quality of silence that changes when two people who have been waited for finally arrive. They had come in through the main entrance at 11 and 2, which I knew because Joanna had texted Gwen, and Gwen had shown me the message without comment. What Joanna had not texted, but told Gwen in person when Gwen went down to confirm the processional timing, was that Patricia Mercer had paused at the entrance of the ceremony space, looked at the microphone stand, and moved in its direction with the purposefulness of someone who had already decided. Joanna had stepped into her path with a clipboard. "Mrs. Mercer, family remarks are scheduled for the toast portion of the reception. That's approximately 2 hours from now." My mother had said, "I know when I'm speaking." Joanna had said, "Of course. The groom's aunt has also requested time. I'm managing a queue." And then she had moved away before my mother had finished forming the response, which was a maneuver Gwen described to me with something approaching admiration. 20 years in event coordination will teach you things that no curriculum covers." My mother had sat down. For now. The string quartet settled into their opening notes. The processional music was something Owen and I had argued about pleasantly for 3 weeks, and agreed on in the end, without either of us quite remembering how. It was the right choice. It was quiet enough to enter to, and present enough to mark the moment. Gwen straightened the back of my dress without being asked, and then stood beside me and looked forward. "Ready?" she said. I did not answer that directly because I was not sure the question had an answer I could use, and I had learned in 38 years that there was no particular point in saying things that had no useful answer. "Yes," I said. I walked through the door. The room changed when I entered it, not dramatically. Just the shift that happens when the person a room has been waiting for finally arrives. 180 people adjusted their attention. The way attention adjusts, not all at once but in a wave. I kept my eyes forward. I did not keep them forward because I was afraid to look. I kept them forward because I had decided, standing in the corridor, that I was going to walk into this room, looking at the place I was walking toward, not at the people I was passing. The altar was at the front. That was where I was going. I passed row 3. I did not look directly at my father. But I knew, from the peripheral awareness that is not quite sight, that he had shifted his weight in the chair when I entered, and I knew, from the same awareness, that his eyes were on me with the particular focus he reserved for things he was trying to understand and could not. I reached the front of the room. Father Thomas nodded. The music continued behind me. Owen was not back yet. I stood at the front of Hargrove Hall in a dress that weighed more than I had expected, with my parents in the third row and my husband in the anteroom to the east, and 180 people watching the space where the two of us were supposed to be standing together, and I was alone. It was, I understood then, exactly the window my mother had been waiting for. The music shifted into its second phrase, and Patricia Mercer stood up. Joanna moved the moment Patricia stood up. I saw it from the front of the room. Joanna was at the side of the ceremony space, near the sound equipment, and she read the situation in the 2 seconds it took my mother to cross the distance between row 3 and the microphone stand, and she moved to intercept. She was fast. She was not fast enough. My mother lifted the microphone from the stand before Joanna reached her. She held it the way you hold something you have already decided belongs to you. She looked at the room. 180 people looked back. "I'm Patricia Mercer," she said. Her voice was warm. It always started warm. This was the thing that had confused me for most of my life. The warmth at the beginning, the way it made you lean toward her before you understood what direction the sentence was traveling. "Rebecca is my daughter, and I am standing here because I have been her mother for 38 years. And because there are things a mother says when she loves someone enough to say them out loud." Father Thomas had gone still at the lectern. He looked at me. I was looking at my mother. "Gerald and I built something," she said. "We built a family. We built a life with standards that took decades to make real. We did it because we believed that the people we loved deserved that Rebecca deserved that. And when a daughter chooses to bring someone into the family her parents built without their blessing, without their knowledge of who that person truly is, without any consideration for what it means to the people who gave everything they had to give her a foundation worth standing on." She paused. "This wedding is a disgrace to everything we have worked for. Not because of who Rebecca is, because of who she is choosing." In the 3rd row, my father stood. He did not need the microphone. His voice had always carried. It was one of the first things I understood about him as a child, that a room adjusted to his voice rather than the other way around. "Rebecca." He said my name, just my name, the way he said it when I was 8 years old and had done something he did not have the patience to explain the wrongness of. The voice that assumed I already knew and was choosing wrong anyway. "You've brought shame on this entire family." 180 people held their breath. I have thought, since then, about what I heard in the 47 seconds between my mother taking that microphone and the moment I spoke. My father says I was entirely still. Gwen, from her seat in the 2nd row, says she watched my hands and they did not move. From the outside, it apparently looked like composure. From the inside, it was something different. From the inside, I heard my mother's voice, and underneath it, I heard every Sunday at 4 in the afternoon. Every careful sentence I had begun with, I just thought. Every conversation I had ended on someone else's schedule. I heard the particular rhythm of my father's speech, the one that left the last part unspoken, because implication was more efficient than accusation. And I recognized it the way you recognize a song you have been trying to stop hearing. My hands were steady. They had been steady all morning. The way I had trained them to be steady, the way I trained other people's hands and voices and breathing when their bodies resisted expressing what they needed to express. I looked at Father Thomas. He was looking at me. He had been looking at me since my mother took the microphone, not with confusion or distress, with the patient attention of someone who understood that the next thing that happened in this room would be determined by what I did in the next 3 seconds, and who had enough experience to know that telling me this would not be useful. I thought about Owen's kitchen in January, his hand flat on the table, the way he had told me the Calloway story in the right order, carefully, because he had been rehearsing it for 9 months and had run out of reasons not to say it. The way he had looked at me after, waiting. I thought about my grandmother's hands, open on the blanket, trembling slightly, and nobody holding them. I thought, "I am not standing in the corner of this room." I said, "Please continue." The 2 words landed in the room, the way something lands when it has been dropped from a height. Not loudly, just with weight. Father Thomas adjusted the small microphone clipped to his collar. He turned a page in the ceremony book, to the section he had been about to read before my mother stood up. He cleared his throat once, with the measured neutrality of a man who had performed weddings through thunderstorms and lost rings, and one occasion he had mentioned to me at the rehearsal dinner that involved a very determined golden retriever. He was 72 years old and had been doing this for 40 years, and he had been asked to continue. And so he continued. My mother was still standing at the side of the room with the microphone in her hand. She had more sentences. I knew this because my mother always had more sentences. She was not a person who prepared one thing when she could prepare three things, and she had been preparing for this for months, possibly for years, possibly since the first Sunday. I called to mention a civil engineer named Owen, and my father said that is not, and left the last part unspoken. But the ceremony had resumed. Father Thomas's voice was filling the room, moving into the space my mother's voice had been filling, and the moment had passed in the way moments pass when the room decides, collectively, to move on without you. My father sat down, not because he had changed his mind. Gerald Mercer did not change his mind in rooms full of people. He sat down because the room had stopped looking at him, and a room that is not looking at you is a room you cannot address, and there was nothing left to address. My mother lowered the microphone slightly. Not all the way. She was not ready to put it down, but she had run out of script, and the ceremony was continuing without her, and the two things she had come here to do were not doing what she had expected them to do. Gwen was in the second row. I could not look at her directly because I was facing forward, which was where I needed to be facing. But from the edge of my vision, I could see her sitting very still with her hands in her lap and her program folded into a precise rectangle, which was what Gwen did when she was processing something large and had nowhere to put it yet. Father Thomas read the opening of the ceremony. The words were familiar to me because I had read them 3 times during the planning, confirming the order and the phrasing, and now I was hearing them in the room where they were supposed to be said, in front of the people who were supposed to hear them. And my mother was holding a microphone at the left side of the room, and my father was sitting in the 3rd row, and Owen was in the anteroom to the east. The ceremony was continuing. That was the thing. The ceremony was continuing. It was the only thing I had been certain of for 3 months. The one outcome I had committed to in January in my kitchen. And it was happening. And I was standing at the front of the room where it was happening, and I was not standing in the corner. I kept my eyes forward. Behind me, I heard the east anteroom door open. The door opened quietly. Owen came in the way Owen did things, without announcing himself, moving into the room as if he had calculated the least disruptive path and was following it. He saw Patricia standing at the side of the room with the microphone. He saw my father in the 3rd row. He saw Father Thomas at the lectern, reading. He saw me at the front. He read all of it in about 3 seconds. Then he walked up the aisle. He passed row 7, row 6, row 5. 180 people watched him, and he moved through their attention the way someone moves through weather, present in it but not slowed by it. He passed row 4, he passed row 3. I was not looking at my father. I was looking at Owen, the way you look at the one fixed point in a room that is moving. But I heard it, a small sound. Not quite a word. The particular sound a person makes when their body reacts to something before their mind has caught up. In my peripheral vision, Gerald Mercer's hands went to the armrests of his chair. Owen was 6 feet past him when my father said it. Why? A pause. Is he here? Not a question. Not to anyone. Not to me or to my mother or to the room. It was the sound of a man asking something of himself that he did not have the answer to, in a voice that had lost, for the first time I could remember, its certainty. Owen did not stop. He did not look at my father. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and he came to stand beside me at the front of the room and put his hand over mine. Father Thomas turned a page. In the 3rd row, Patricia Mercer turned to look at her husband. She had heard him speak in every register for 40 years. She had never heard that one. The ceremony continued. Father Thomas read the words that needed to be read, in the order they needed to be read in, with the measured pace of someone who understood that the job was to complete the thing that had been started. We said what we needed to say. Owen said, "I do," looking at my face, not at the room behind him. I said, "I do," looking at his. It was not the ceremony I had imagined when I was younger. The one I had imagined had my parents in the front row and nobody in the third row and no microphone situation and nothing to survive. This one had all of that. It was harder, and it was realer, and it was ours. Father Thomas said, "You may kiss the bride." From the second row, Gwen Hartley stood up and began to applaud. She was the only person standing for about 1 full second. 1 second of a woman in a pale green dress, alone on her feet, clapping with the complete conviction of someone who had been waiting to do this for 3 months and was not going to let the moment pass without marking it. Then the person beside her stood. Then the row behind. Then the room, in the uneven wave that rooms move in, stood. In the third row, Gerald Mercer remained seated. My mother had put the microphone down at some point during the vows. I did not see when. She was standing at the side of the room now, not in her seat, with her hands folded in front of her and the particular stillness of someone who has finished one thing and not yet decided what comes next. The reception was in the adjacent hall. Owen and I had been there for perhaps 20 minutes, talking to people, accepting congratulations, moving through the room the way you move through the beginning of something large, when Owen said quietly that he had invited his father. I wasn't sure he would come, he said. He said he'd try. I looked toward the main entrance. Martin Calloway was standing just inside it. 67 years old. A plain dark jacket. He was looking around the room with the patience of someone who had learned, through practice, how to enter spaces where he was not sure of his welcome. Owen crossed the room, and they stood together for a moment, in the way fathers and sons stand when they have not seen each other recently, and do not have a language for what they mean to each other that fits into a greeting. Owen turned. He put his hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad," he said, "this is Rebecca." Martin Calloway looked at me. He did not say anything immediately. He was reading something in my face, the way people read faces when they are looking for information that won't come through words. "Owen told me what you decided," he said finally. 3 months ago. He told me this morning." A pause. "Thank you." I did not know what to say to that. I said nothing. I think that was all right. On the far side of the room, I became aware, without looking directly, that Gerald Mercer had seen Martin Calloway. Martin was not looking at Gerald. He was looking at Owen, listening to something Owen was telling him about the venue, the restoration of the original beams, the way the light came through in the morning. Martin was not performing ease. He simply had it. The ease of a man who had lost everything and rebuilt and arrived at a point where the room he was standing in was the room his son had gotten married in, and that was sufficient. Gerald stood with a glass he had not drunk from and looked at a man he had not seen in 15 years who was not looking at him, and I watched my father understand, from across the room, that this was its own kind of answer. Joanna's assistant approached Martin a few minutes later and asked if he would like to say a few words. Martin looked at Owen. Owen nodded. Martin took the microphone from the stand, correctly, and stood at the front of the room. "I want to talk about the boy Owen was at 19, he said. His voice was even and unhurried. 3 jobs, no complaints, because that was the year our family lost everything, our company, our house. 15 years of savings." He paused. "Not because of bad luck, because someone we trusted decided that our agreement meant less to him than his own ambition." The room was quiet. The people who knew Gerald Mercer, the ones who had sat across tables from him in conference rooms and attended the same church and been to the same dinners, looked at one another. Then some of them looked toward the far side of the room. "I rebuilt," Martin said. "It took a long time. Owen rebuilt. And tonight I am standing in a room where some of you know exactly what I am talking about." He looked at Owen. "I want to thank Rebecca. She made a decision 3 months ago that I did not know about until this morning. She invited her parents to this wedding. Knowing what she knew, she invited them anyway." He raised his glass. "That took more courage than anything I did at 19. To Rebecca and Owen." The room raised their glasses. Martin was still speaking when I saw Gerald set his glass down. He did not finish the motion of raising it. He set it on the nearest table and pushed back his chair and stood. Patricia, beside him, did not understand immediately. She put her hand on his arm and he said something I could not hear across the room. And she looked at his face. She looked at his face for a long time. Then he walked toward the exit. Not quickly, not dramatically. The walk of a man who has decided that there is no good option left and is choosing the least bad one. He passed people he knew. None of them stopped him. Some of them watched him go. Patricia stood beside the empty chair for a moment. She was still looking at where he had been standing. Then she followed him out. Martin sat down. The room continued. And some people in that room would never look at Gerald Mercer the same way again. In the parking lot outside Hargrove Hall, my parents stood beside their car in the dark. I know this because Joanna told me later, not because I saw it. She had gone out to check on a catering detail and seen them there. Gerald with his hand on the door handle, not opening it. Patricia standing on her side of the car, not getting in. The lights of the hall visible through the windows above them, and the sound of the reception inside, and the two of them in the parking lot not speaking. Patricia asked him something. Joanna was not close enough to hear what. Gerald opened the car door and got in. Patricia stood outside for another moment. Then she got in as well. The car did not move for a long time. Inside, the reception continued. The people who knew Gerald Mercer, who had sat at his table at the Piedmont Business Association dinners and attended the same church on Sunday mornings and been invited to the house on Fairfax Drive for holiday gatherings, moved through the reception with a particular quality of awareness that was not quite conversation. They talked about other things. But some of them had looked at his face when Martin was speaking. Some of them had watched him walk out. And the name Calloway, for those who knew the name, had begun doing the work that names do when they resurface after years of absence. A man named Robert Ashby, who had been in a real estate consortium with Gerald for 6 years and had done well by it, stood near the bar with a glass of bourbon and said nothing to anyone for a while. His wife said something to him and he nodded and looked at his glass. At the table set for family, on the queue side of the room, 2 chairs were empty. The flowers were still there. The napkins folded the way Joanna's team folded napkins, into shapes that required attention to produce. The champagne glasses still full, the way glasses stay when nobody has sat down to drink from them. I looked at those 2 chairs from across the room and waited for the feeling that usually accompanied an absence, the familiar weight of a space that should be filled and was not. It was not there. What was there instead was something I did not have a name for, something lighter than relief and quieter than satisfaction. The chairs were empty because my parents had left and the room was continuing, and Martin Calloway was sitting 3 tables away talking to Owen's cousin Jimmy about something that was making Jimmy laugh, and Owen was beside me with his hand at the small of my back the way he stood when he was present in a room and wanted me to know it. The chairs were empty. The room was full. Patricia came back in alone. She came through the side entrance, not the main one, and she stood just inside the door for a moment, as if she was deciding whether to cross the distance between herself and the rest of the room. I saw her before she saw me. She was still in the gray dress. Her hands were at her sides. She found me across the room and walked to where I was standing. "I didn't know," she said. She said it the way you say something you have been deciding how to say for the last 15 minutes in a parking lot, while your husband sits in the driver's seat and doesn't answer your questions. Not as an apology exactly, not as a defense, as something that needed to be put somewhere outside of her. I looked at my mother. She was 61 years old, and she had come to my wedding to perform something she believed was necessary, and she had found out, in the middle of it, that the man she had been performing it for had not told her the truth about why it was necessary. That was its own reckoning, and it was going to take her longer than one evening in a parking lot to complete. "I know you didn't, Mom," she nodded. "Not today," I said. 2 words. The same weight as 2 other words I had said 3 hours earlier. Not an ending. A door that was not locked. She stood there for another moment. Then she nodded again and went back through the side entrance, back to the parking lot, back to the car that had not moved. Martin Calloway was at his table when Owen and I came to sit with him for a while. He was eating something from the appetizer spread and listening to Jimmy finish a story. When Jimmy finished, he laughed, and then he saw us and put his fork down. "She looks like someone who knows what she's doing," he said to Owen. Owen said, "She does." Martin picked his fork back up. "Good." He did not say anything else about the evening. He did not reference Gerald or the toast or the parking lot. He ate what was on his plate and listened to Jimmy start another story and was, as far as I could tell, a man having a quiet dinner at his son's wedding, which was exactly what he was. He drove 4 hours for this. Owen told me that on the way home, in the car, in the dark, with Charlotte receding in the rearview mirror and the highway opening up ahead of us, and neither of us ready yet to talk about the full shape of what the day had been. He drove 4 hours, Owen said. I know, 45 seconds of quiet. He didn't tell me he was coming until this morning, Owen said. I looked out the window at the highway, and the dark beyond it, and the occasional light of a gas station or an overpass, the ordinary geography of a drive home from a place where something large has happened. Silence was worse for your father, Owen said. Gerald, I mean. He knows that. He was right. I had known it since January. There were people for whom being publicly known as wrong was manageable, was something to argue against or reframe or outlast. And there were people for whom the loss of the room's respect was the thing that could not be recovered from, because the room's respect was the architecture the whole life was built on. Gerald Mercer had walked out of a room while the father of his daughter's husband was still speaking. Some of the people in that room would forget it. Some of them would not. I did not say any of this out loud. There was no need. Outside the window, the city was gone, and there was just highway and dark, and Owen's hands on the wheel, and the low sound of the car moving through the night, and somewhere behind us, 2 empty chairs with napkins folded into shapes. Required attention to produce. I thought about counting. The way I always thought about counting when there was too much to process at once. The Sunday calls, the years, the cost of the thing I had been doing without understanding I was doing it. I did not count. Not because the numbers would have been wrong or the accounting would have been false, but because I was in a car going somewhere that was mine, with a person who had driven to Charlotte in January and put his hand flat on my kitchen table and told me the truth he had been carrying for 9 months, and the counting had served its purpose, which was to fill the space until I had something better to fill it with. I had something better now. My father left without a word, and Martin Calloway stayed. 2 men made a choice that night in that room, and every person still standing in it understood which choice meant what. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. I did not count. There is a kind of courage that does not look like courage from the outside. It looks like standing still. It looks like 2 words spoken quietly to a man with a ceremony book while your mother is still holding a microphone. It looks like an invitation sent on a Tuesday afternoon, knowing exactly what it might bring through the door. What Rebecca learned and what this story asks you to consider is that the people who need your permission to define you will keep taking it for as long as you keep offering it. The day you stop offering it is not the day they change. It is the day you do. You do not need to win the room. You do not need them to understand. You only need to decide what continues and what does not. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself? And looking back,